Good evening, everyone. Greetings to those of you who are joining us now on Facebook Live for this annual commemoration of the Sandy Hook school shooting. My name is Donna Lowen, and I'm a member of the Dubuque Coalition for Nonviolence. That is the group that is bringing you this special event. The coalition we'll refer to as CNV, was formed immediately after the tragic loss of innocent life at the school in Newtown, Connecticut, 9 years ago today. Our mission statement describes that we act to address the crisis of weapons of violence in order to create a more peaceful and nonviolent community. This is the agenda for tonight's event. We have 3 parts. We will first hear from a parent whose children survived a shooting incident in their school and are recovering from the trauma of this event. Next, we will hear from one of our CNV leaders about a very important issue coming to Iowa voters next November. And then we will conclude with a musical tribute to the victims of the Sandy Hook shooting, December 14, 2012. Let's begin. Allow me to introduce our guest speaker, Chris Oldroyd. Chris Oldroyd and her husband, Tom Geeson, are both TV producers in Denver, Colorado, but they consider their most important job to be parents to their 3 children, twin boys who are now 19 and in college, and a 3rd son who is in 10th grade. In the parents' words, on May 7, 2019, our oldest son was a senior at STEM High School in Highlands Ranch, Colorado, and our youngest son was in 7th grade there, when 2 students came in to our oldest son's classroom with guns, intending to kill everyone in the room. They shot 8 people, killing one of our son's friends, Kendrick Castillo. Both our oldest and youngest sons were in classrooms where students were shot. Chris has navigated parenting kids who have experienced this trauma while also grieving and recovering for herself. We welcome you, Chris, to share your comments.
Thank you, Donna. And I want to thank everyone for being here virtually and for caring about an issue that might not have affected you directly. And this is something we never thought would affect us directly either. It is just impossible to think that 2 of my 3 kids could have been in a school shooting where kids literally next to them, touching them, were shot. And yet it happened. And it's been 2.5 years now since that happened. And we're still feeling the impact of that. During that time, we've gone through 2 trials. I don't know, hundreds of hours of counseling. And it's an emotional challenge that will be with all of us forever. And, you know, I have to say that not a day goes by that I'm not grateful that my children survived and made it through that trauma. And I'm also very aware that the parents of Kendrick Castillo live a very different life because their only son was killed that day. And that has been very challenging for us. We knew them well. My oldest had been on a robotics team with Kendrick for 4 years. And in fact, Kendrick came to our house and made his very first computer at our house. And my oldest boys helped him build it. It was we lived what we thought was an idyllic, safe, normal life until this shooting happened. So I've been asked to kind of walk you through what happens when a family and kids are victims of a school shooting. And neither of my kids were shot, thank goodness, but they were severely impacted, having to triage other kids who were shot, and dealing with essentially survivor's guilt for all this time. So the shooting happened on May 7th, 2019. And for our family, that was a big day because my senior had finally agreed to get his driver's license. He was 16, a day from turning 17. His twin brother, who went to a different school, had his driver's license for a year, and a year minus 1 day. And so it was a big day that morning. My youngest was dropped off to school earlier, and I took my oldest to school, to get his license, and passed with flying colors. I took him to school, checked him in at the front desk, said hi to people there, told him I loved him. He told me he loved me, and I went on my way by about 10 o'clock that morning. I went out to lunch, and then I went to REI to go shopping for my boy's birthday the next day. I got one of them a waterproof speaker. I got another one, glacier glasses for climbing, and my phone rang. And it's kind of a joke in our family that I never have my phone with me, but I haven't had my phone with me at the time. And it was my oldest. I picked up, and he was out of breath and, emotional, and said, "There's been a shooting at school." And it just didn't even register with me. Here I was talking to him, and he's like, "There's shooting, I'm fine." And I asked him where he was, and he had left the school. And I was going to ask him more questions, and he said, "Mom, I've got to go because I'm about the only one who has my phone." And so the other kids are going to use my phone and call their parents. So I hung up with him and dropped the things at REI and ran out to my car, called my husband, told him what happened. And as we were talking on the phone, and I was getting ready to drive to school as fast as I could, we were debating what to do about my youngest, because we hadn't heard from my youngest. And should we call? We didn't know, what if the classroom was in lockdown? What if there was a shooter still in there? What if the noise of a phone call would alert a shooter? We didn't know if we should call or not. And also, I was in a little bit of denial. I talked to my son, and he's a very level-headed kid. And he sounded, alarmed, but not injured. He said he wasn't injured. So I wasn't sure how serious it was. You hear about shootings all the time. And I thought, there's no way it could be that serious. And so as I was driving to the school, I got on the highway, and 2 emergency vehicles, police, passed me with their sirens on, going fast, in the direction of the school. And I thought, okay, they must be on their way to the school. And then about a minute later, like 5 passed me on the way to the school. And then another minute later, a caravan of probably 40 vehicles passed me. And that was when I realized it was a big deal. It was a caravan of command posts, of ambulances, police vehicles, of course. And then I was talking to my husband and I said, we've got to get a hold of my youngest. And so we texted and didn't hear anything. And so my oldest had been at school for 4 years at that point, and so I knew my way around how to get to the school. And where I was following the emergency vehicles, but they went right to the school, and I knew the back way to get closer to the school. So well, where they went to school, I went around to the school to try to get closer. And when I got there, I jumped out of my car and I could hear the speaker that's lockdown, whatever they say. And I heard some loud booms, which we found out later were SWAT teams, possibly doing some flash bombs or something like that. We still hadn't heard from my youngest. And at that point, I heard from my other twin who went to a different high school, and his school had been put on lockdown too. And so he was, of course, worried about his siblings. And I told him that we had talked to his twin, but didn't know where the youngest was. And so he was in the counselor's office at the high school. And so I told him I was going to be trying to get a hold of his youngest sibling and that I would call him back. We finally did get a hold of my youngest, obviously. And the classroom had been in lockdown, and my youngest said, I'm fine. They're going to take us out of the classroom and put us in this field. And so then I was just so relieved. I'm thinking, thank goodness my kids are fine. My youngest has just been in a lockdown, but taken to a field, and it's fine. My oldest, told me there was a school shooting, but he's fine, and it's all over. But I'm going to back up a little bit, because my youngest actually had been in counseling for the fear of school shootings a couple of years before that. They do, in their school district, they do some serious lockdown drills to try to protect kids from school shootings. And those were very scary. And my youngest is very sensitive and aware of national news. And when the shooting happened in Florida, that was very scary. And my youngest was just concerned about school shootings. And at the time, well, first of all, we got counseling to give him tools to deal with that. But also at the time, the thing we would say was, think of all the millions of school students there are, all the thousands and thousands of schools there are. And the chance of you being in a school shooting is less than you being hit by lightning. There's just not a chance it's going to happen. You go to a great school, you're in a great school district, it just is not going to happen. And so after a year of counseling, my youngest was convinced, you're right, it's not going to happen. It's an irrational fear. And 6 months later, not only was my youngest in a school shooting, but I found out later, when they had done their lockdown drill, they had to lie down in a corner. My youngest was lying down in the corner next to somebody else who was shot. A bullet came through the wall. And during the shooting, the teacher had my youngest help find something to use as a tourniquet on this girl's leg, and helped, my youngest had to help find something to elevate the leg. And I didn't know it at the time. When I found out, I thought, that is absolutely my child's worst nightmare. I mean, literally. My youngest had been in counseling to deal with the fear of school shootings before that all happened. But in the immediate aftermath, I just was grateful my kids were alive, and I didn't know how close they had been to the violence. I was able to see my oldest. He had escaped with 3 kids who had been shot, actually, and collapsed as they got off of school grounds. And an ambulance had taken some of them away. Some of the first responders who got there had rounded up. There were about 10 kids, kind of pulled them farther away from the school, and they were essentially under guard there. And I was able to find him, my oldest, and give him a hug. And I said, "Are you okay? Is everything okay?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm fine." And I said, "Well, how was anybody injured?" I mean, at that time, I just didn't know. And he's like, "Yeah, yeah." And he said, "And Kendrick is pretty bad." And I said, "You know what? Kendrick was shot." And he's like, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, is he okay?" And my oldest is like, "I don't know. I think he's pretty bad." And of course, we knew Kendrick really well. And so I wanted my oldest to come with me, but the police wanted him to stay because they were all witnesses and were going to be interviewed. So they were actually taken to a rec center. Just a weird fact, the SWAT person who was guarding them flagged down a van, a mother with a toddler in the van, and said, "Would you take these kids to the rec center?" So all the kids piled in the van with the toddler, and this mom took the kids to the rec center. So after I met with my oldest, I went on essentially a quest to find my youngest, who had said that they'd been taken to a field. And so I raced around the huge campus, and I found the field where they were. And they wouldn't let us, the authorities wouldn't let us, in close contact, but I was able to wave. And again, I just thought, well, it's terrible that this is my youngest deepest fear, but it's fine. Nothing happened. They're fine. So eventually we were all reunited. We went to the rec center, and my son was actually one of the first couple that was released by authorities. All the kids who were in any proximity to any of the shooting victims were interviewed, and he'd been interviewed. And so we were waiting for him to be released. And again, at that time, I still didn't know he was in the classroom where it happened. While we were waiting for him, we saw Kendrick's dad, and Kendrick's dad was kind of wandering around, and we said, John, how, are you okay? And he said, well, I haven't heard from Kendrick. I don't know where he is. And I knew that Truman said he had been shot. And John said, I think he's been shot, but we haven't heard from him. And so then we tried to help John track down where Kendrick might have been. We talked to the police, and they said that we needed to call hospitals on our own. So we were doing that. And nobody had Kendrick. I mean, he hadn't been taken in any hospitals. So then Truman was released to us, and I said, or my oldest was released to us. And I said to him, can you go talk to John, Kendrick's dad? He hasn't seen Kendrick, and, he's worried about it. And my son said, I do not want to talk to John. I can't do it. I don't want to do it. And now that wasn't characteristic of him at all, but I knew that it was a traumatic day, and he looked kind of pale, and it was cold outside, and I of course was concerned about my son, and I said, that's okay, you don't have to. And eventually, though, John did kind of corner my son and ask him, do you know where Kendrick is? And my son said no. And but he did know. He just didn't want to have to tell Kendra's dad what he knew. Here's this kid a day from turning 17, and he has just witnessed, half a dozen people shot, someone killed. He doesn't want to have to tell his dad, tell the dad what happened. So we eventually got home with both of the kids, and our other son was waiting there for us, and we just gathered in my oldest room, and that was when the story of the day unfolded. How in my oldest son's classroom, they had been watching a movie. It was 5 or so days away from graduation. And one of the kids in the class came in late. Another kid who wasn't in the class came into the classroom as well. And then they told everybody not to move and started shooting. They blocked the doors, both doors, so that nobody could escape. But fortunately, Kendrick and 2 other boys charged one of the shooters and interrupted their plan. We found out at the trial that they had essentially a hit list, people to save, a couple of people to save, people they wanted to get, and other people they didn't care about. And I have to say, that is hard to deal with, knowing that a shooter wouldn't care. My son didn't know either one of them. Well, he knew one of the boys just in passing, but didn't even know who the other kid was. And it's hard for me as a parent to think about the depravity of somebody who doesn't care about someone's life. And as a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old, how do they deal with knowing that there are people out there who just don't care, who could shoot you like that? After the shooting, of course, we met with counselors and had a lot of strength in friends from the school community, gained strength. We went to a lot of events with Kendrick's parents who were really struggling. Kendrick was their only child. Other kids who were shot were in the hospital for up to a couple of weeks. And it was a miracle that more children didn't die. And I have to say the reason more kids didn't die is because the shooters did not have assault weapons. They were, I guess, smaller weapons. And even though, some kids were shot 3 times and still have bullets in their body to this day, it wasn't enough to blow a giant hole in them and kill them instantly. So, we are really relieved about that. But the aftermath has been, we went to all the trials. There were 2 trials. The kids were tried separately. It turns out that there's no real reason that they wanted to do it. No one to this day really knows why they were so angry and wanted to kill people, except for the oldest one, apparently, just had a fantasy of killing people. And so we went to, I don't know, probably a month's worth of court dates. My husband was at every single day of the trial for the oldest shooter. And a lot of the reason for that is to support Kendrick's family who lost their son, but also the other kids who had been shot. My oldest was what's called a named victim. He was one of the charges against both shooters was attempted murder on my son. And so he did have to testify. That was, challenging as a college student, knowing that was coming up. The trial didn't go on schedule. It would be delayed. They would tell him it was going to happen. And, imagine being an 18-year-old college student and having to focus on finals and also knowing that you have to go testify at a murder trial and relive the worst day of your life. It 2 years later, it's an ongoing challenge emotionally to be able to move beyond that. In addition to that, normal things that kids would want to do, 4th of July fireworks, loud activities, fairs with lots of people, those are no longer fun. Theaters aren't fun. Any kind of violent movies, not gonna happen. I think these are changes for my kids that are permanent, and that separate them from other kids, separates our family from other people. But I have to say, there are hundreds of thousands of families and students that have been affected by school violence like this. This school had 1,800 kids in it. It was a K-12 school, so it was mostly in the middle school and high school. But all of those kids were traumatized that day. All of their families were traumatized that day. There are, 250,000 people walking around who've been traumatized by gun violence, even if they haven't been shot. My oldest worked at Starbucks for a couple of summers, and he was talking to another one of his coworkers who asked him what school he went to, and he told him. And the other kid said, "Oh, dude, we've got a lot in common," because that kid had also been in a school shooting. And it is harrowing to think that we live in a world where our children have to worry about whether they will survive their school day. And I worry about that all the time. I hope that nothing like this happens to us again. My youngest transferred schools, and it was a big dilemma about whether to transfer, because we use logic in our family a lot. And just like I said, the chance of a school shooting is just not going to happen. But my youngest was saying, well, this school that he was transferring to hasn't had a school shooting yet. And maybe it's better to stay at the same school because there hasn't ever been school shooting twice at one school. So I just feel like the time to address something like this was 10 years ago, was 20 years ago. And I am thankful that there are people like you all who are watching this, who care about it, who want to do something about it, and who know that even though it might not have affected you yet, that it could. It could. Lightning struck for us. And we are doing our best to try to overcome what happened and live our best lives after that. And part of that involves getting involved in dealing with gun violence and trying to do something to stop it. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Donna.
Thank you so much, Chris. I really felt with you as you took pains to share this life-changing story, and we thank you for that. If you're willing for just a moment more, I have a couple of questions that just a brief response, if you would. One is, what long-term impact have you observed from families who have experienced a shooting?
We're in contact with a lot of the families, and it has really varied. Some families are very bitter and angry, and other families, other kids who were involved in the shooting have been severely traumatized and have had their schooling. All of these kids were seniors, and some of them didn't go to college the next year. Some of them couldn't go back to school. Some of them, had one of the kids who actually helped restrain one of the shooters, had a dream to be in the Marines, and he had to take a break from that because it was too much PTSD. So I think that for all of the people, it has an impact, but it varies, but it is there.
Thank you for that response. And the other thing we are wondering, how did you and Tom as parents, and also your middle son, feel during the aftermath of the shooting, and how are you dealing with your grief? You have spoken to this a good deal. Is there anything you would like to add?
I'll just say that it's hard. Part of what we deal with is navigating the emotional current of our children who were in the shooting. And, we want to check in on them, but if they're having what we think is a great day, do we want to mention it and bring them down? If there's a school shooting, do we want to say, did you know there was a school shooting? Just a heads up. But if they haven't heard about it, we don't want to ruin their day. My middle son, he's struggled a lot with his twin because he hasn't known how to navigate that either. They have this experience as a gulf between them. And, my middle son just wants to be sensitive in the same way we do. It's just perilous waters. You never know how to handle it, and you just do the best you can.
Thank you again, Chris, for your talk and also for responding to these questions and really for helping us understand the unbearable grief that was born of this senseless violence. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on, and thanks for listening.
Absolutely. Next up is Art Roach to tell us briefly about the gun rights amendment that Iowans will be voting on next November. Art is on our coalition for Nonviolence Committee, and he's a board member of Iowans for Gun Safety, the statewide organization devoted exclusively to common sense solutions to gun violence.
Thanks, Donna. Yeah, so in November 2022, about 11 months from now, Iowans are going to be asked to vote on this amendment to the Iowa Constitution. We're calling it the Strict Scrutiny Amendment. You'll hear it referred incorrectly by some people as Iowa's Second Amendment. But this proposed amendment is not simply a restatement of the United States Second Amendment for Iowa. It's a large overreach of the right to keep and bear arms. The wording of the amendment, I'll just read it directly as you will read it on your ballot in November. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The sovereign state of Iowa affirms and recognizes this right to be a fundamental individual right. Any and all restrictions of this right shall be subject to strict scrutiny. Period. Yes or no? That's what you're going to vote on. Those last four words, the subject to strict scrutiny language, we think is too extreme, and it could severely hinder any efforts for common sense gun laws in Iowa. It could lead to costly court challenges of current laws. So it would eliminate the likelihood of any future laws and probably cause the revocation of current laws that would protect us from gun violence. We find it unacceptable that pro-gun groups have centered on the rights of gun-owning citizens over and against the safety of the general public. We think Iowans have the right not to get shot. Strict scrutiny has been enacted in only 3 other states: Alabama, Missouri, and Louisiana. Nothing against those states, they're wonderful places, but they're maybe not particularly good role models for Iowa, at least in this case. Alabama's gun death rate is the 5th highest among all 50 states. Missouri's is the 7th highest, and Louisiana's is the 6th highest. Not good role models. We'd rather not go there. What were they thinking when they wanted this strict scrutiny language. It has to do with how judges consider the cases that come before them. Judges would be legally compelled to opt in favor of the least restrictive interpretation of gun laws, either when they're making rulings regarding gun legislation that has been enacted that they have to make a legal decision about. Here's an example of what can happen. A man in Louisiana who had been previously convicted of burglary, a felony, was later caught in a car with a handgun in the back seat and an AK-47 with a 30-round clip in the trunk. He was arrested because Louisiana has a law that says felons cannot have guns. But the judge, applying a strict scrutiny review to the case, decided the arrest was unconstitutional, and he dismissed the charge against this convicted felon. In Iowa, we've been trying to find the right balance between gun rights and gun laws. Like Louisiana, we've chosen to keep guns out of the hands of convicted felons. We've also kept guns out of the schools and made machine guns illegal to own. Every one of these laws could be challenged in a future court case that would be subject to the special level of strict scrutiny if this constitutional amendment is passed next November. Do Iowans want to run risks such as tying the hands of judges and lawmakers seeking to protect Iowans from the firearms epidemic? More guns in the hands of convicted felons, perpetrators of domestic violence, persons with serious mental illness. We want to run such risks as businesses and homeowners being unable to limit guns on their property, or risks like increased costs for court cases challenging gun laws. Subject to strict scrutiny, these 4 words could change everything. But you can change everything with 1 word on November 8th, 2022. No. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Art, for this vital information so that we will be informed voters. Now, in honor of the 9th anniversary of the Sandy Hook School Massacre, we would like to play a special tribute to those we lost in that tragedy. Here is the Alleluia Chorus led by Christine Aguilera and other artists associated with The Voice.
I've heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do ya? And it goes like this: the 4th, the 5th, the minor 4th, and the major left, and the baffled cat blew. Hallelujah, 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 I did my best and it wasn't much. I couldn't feel, so I tried to touch. I told the truth, I didn't come to fool ya.
And even though it all went wrong, I stand before the Lord of song with nothing on my tongue but hallelujah.
Sincere thanks to both Chris and Art for the insights each of them shared with us tonight. Chris, we are so glad to have met you and appreciate your willingness to share your family's story. May the healing continue. Thank you to viewers for joining us tonight, and best wishes to everyone for a holiday season free of violence and full of peace and joy.